Good afternoon and good morning and good evening, wherever you are. And my big welcome to today's webinar on the TVET and skills development in the time of the COVID-19. My name is Sang Lee. I'm a director of Employment Policy Department here at the ILO. Before we get started, probably you know this rule very well, but please kindly note that we provide a simultaneous interpretation in English, French, and Spanish. So you can click the interpretation icon in your meetings control and select the language channel you would like to hear. And for your information, the webinar will be recorded, and kindly mute yourself throughout the webinar if you are not speaking. So if you have questions during the presentation and also during the panel sessions, you can write your questions to Q&A chat box. And we will have the Q&A sessions at the end to answer all your questions if possible. As you know very well, the COVID-19 pandemic has affected economies and society around the world and caused an unprecedented fall in economic activities and working out losses and income losses, and also sharp increase in unemployment and underemployment. Along these effects on the labor market, the pandemic has also disrupted the education training at all levels. So TVET programs have been particularly hard hit, given their unique focus on hands-on training and acquisition of practical skills. In light of this crisis, the ILO and UNESCO and World Bank jointly implemented an online survey in April and May last year to gather information on good practices and share knowledges among TVET providers to mitigate the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic in the area of education and training. So based on this survey finding, we have just published the final report with the title, Skill Development in the Time of COVID-19, taking stock of the initial responses in technical and vocational training, education and training. So let me congratulate all the team on this very impressive report. In today's seminar, we aim to shed light on the many issues, but three major issues. First, how the pandemic has disrupted the TVET and the main challenges faced by the TVET institutions during the crisis. Second, what are the key policy responses and training measures to ensure the continuity of the TVET provision? And third, how TVET stakeholders are preparing to address the aftermath of the COVID-19 and to strengthen the resilience and the responsiveness of the TVET systems to future shock. So in terms of organizing this webinar, first we will have the quick opening remark, and then we will share the key findings of the report, and then we hear the on-the-ground experience of the TVET providers and policymakers and social partners during the pandemic. The panel session is particularly dedicated to bring the voices of some survey respondents from around the world who share the challenges and solutions in coping with the crisis since the survey. So without further ado, let me first introduce and invite the Omar Arias. He is the practice manager of the World Bank Global Engagement and Knowledge in Education Global Practice for the opening speech. So the Omar, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and indeed, again, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you very much for our partners in UNESCO and the ILO for this collaboration. I just wanted to highlight perhaps a few points going into the discussion. I mean, of course, as you've said, the crisis that we have been living, which is obviously unprecedented and has impacted everybody in all sectors and all countries. In the case of education, what it has especially revealed is the fragility of systems of service delivery to what we've long known is key to learning, which is the in-person interaction, whether it is in for small children, for youth, or for technical vocational education or adult learning. There are certain things that one can do through remote learning, but it is very difficult to completely replace the in-person interaction. Now, in the case of technical vocational education and training, there is an added element to that fragility because there's a lot of the learning happens hands-on and through practice. And we can replace some parts of the delivery. Again, obviously, there are limits to that. And the crisis has revealed the big digital divide that systems face. But even if one had that, there's still going to be a need for the in-person. And when it comes to, for example, apprenticeships and the practical training that happens in firms, there's really no replacement for that. So I would say that, going forward and thinking through the lessons of the crisis and the theme of building back better, we really should be thinking about modes of hybrid learning. In a way, that can actually be more efficient because it could potentially reduce some costs if you have an ability to deliver some parts of the training and education remotely. You could even actually improve access considerably. Again, that will require a lot of investments, which today are lacking on digital infrastructure. And by that, I mean everything from devices to digital content. And of course, very, very important, as will be presented later, the preparedness and readiness of instructors in TVET to be able to actually deliver instruction remotely. But so hybrid learning, I think, will be fundamental, and it'll be great to hear from the panel later how that is shaping up in their own experience and in their own countries. The second is that as economies rebuild and recover, and we have a long way still, as people know, with the expected deployment of vaccines, and as that happens, economies will recover. We will notice and will actually realize that the impacts in many sectors have been structural. So there's going to be skills mismatches. There are certain, I think, jobs that will be impacted even more in terms of trends that we were already seeing by, say, automation and technology. And there's going to be needs arising in other sectors. I mean, certainly there's a big need in the health sector, as we now know very painfully. And so systems are going to have to be very responsive to that changing nature of the demand for skills and the changing nature even of jobs. Diagnosing that and actually having ways in which we can provide more information to youth and adults on what are those sectors that are in most need, what are the skills that are in highest demand, so they can actually make their decisions more wisely. So information is a second point, which again has been a challenge before COVID, but I think in the immediate aftermath and as systems react to the recovery of economies, it will be really critical to reduce skills mismatches, to put in place mechanisms to improve the information. And then third, finally, I mean, the whole issue of use of technology is clear for delivery of services, but I would say also for the management of the service itself. I mean, technology can be very, very useful, for instance, for this issue of providing information. the information gap is not only about what's in demand, but also in terms of people being able to signal their skills. And a lot has been learned now during the last months about the potential for certifying skills through credentials and the use of digital badges, to the extent that systems are able to intensify and be more deliberate about the certification of skills, not as something that happens after courses are completed, but alone. Because again, in many cases, people, what they require are short courses in order to be able to get back to work, but they need to be able to signal to employers that they have either completed training, but actually that they have acquired valuable skills. So I would put those 3 points. I hope very much that the panel can reflect on these. These are things that will be part of, as you know, of our report that we're working together with ILO and UNESCO about building back better, rebuilding TVET systems, drawing lessons from the crisis, but really looking forward. And it will be really useful to learn how these are shaping up in the countries. So let me stop there. Again, thank you very much for the invitation, and I look forward to a very rich discussion later on. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Omar. Actually, you set out the set of 3 very important issues actually for discussion today. So it's a very nice segue to the joint report you just mentioned. So it's thank you very much. It's very nicely done. So let's just move on to see what are the key findings of the joint report. So let me introduce my colleague Olga. She is the ILO Senior Skills and Employability Specialist. So she will present us the key findings on the report on the behalf of the 3 agencies who actually work together, ILO, World Bank, and the UNESCO. So Olga, floor is yours.
Many thanks, Ankian. Do you see the screen already? Yes, so my presentation is here. So it's a great pleasure, and also I'm quite proud to be able to present on behalf of the 3 agencies the key findings of our just released report, Skills Development in the Time of the COVID-19. And you will see that in the subtitle, we gave the name Taking Stock of the Initial Responses in Technical and Vocational Education and Training, TVET. The initial responses, because the report is based mostly on the survey, which we implemented together with the World Bank and UNESCO between the 5th of April and the 15th of May of 2020. So just to start, that it's indeed an interagency report based on the interagency survey. And I would like to use this opportunity to thank very much for the wonderful partnership, our colleagues from both UNESCO and the World Bank. I put here the names of people who represent the core team of authors from the 3 agencies. I'm not going to read them for the sake of time. You can see them also on the report. You can see them in the presentation. But I would like also to use this opportunity to recognize the role of the field offices and the country teams, and also other colleagues in headquarters of all 3 agencies who have contributed tremendously to the implementation of the survey, who provided comments to the report, who provided translations of questionnaires and the survey results, who provided the quality data check at country level, and who also contributed to the weekly analysis of the survey results, which were uploaded on a weekly basis, and to the dissemination of the results. Just to say that most of these authors are hopefully present on the webinar. So when there will be a Q&A session, I think it will be really up to everybody to answer your question. I don't want really to dominate the whole discussion. This is really just to present the results on behalf of the 3 agencies. So of course it's it's a fairly short time. Therefore, I cannot give the full justice to the report results. I would welcome really your interest, because we have a lot of participants at the webinar. Thank you very much for your interest. So hopefully you will be able also to go and to see the results of the full report, because the full report is of course based on the survey results, but we did add also some results from other surveys, from other literature. So of course it's much more comprehensive if you read the full report. So now in terms of the coverage of the survey itself and types of respondents, you will see that we have just few countries not covered. And we're quite proud of the results that we had 1,353 respondents from 126 countries responding to the survey. And this happened due to two things. One, of course, because the survey itself was provided in 8 languages, but also this is thanks to the commitment and devotion to all of our colleagues in all 3 languages, trying to reach out to people and to promote the survey as much as possible. I have to underline one thing, that most of respondents, when I say respondents, these are of course individuals, but these are individuals that represent institutions. So this is not an individual survey, this is an institutional survey. And when they represent institutions, most of them come from TVET providers. So this is really people on the ground who provide training, as well as policymakers. 17% are mostly ministries of labor and ministries of education. Others come from social partners, both employers and workers' organizations, career counseling, and employment services. We had some champions actually in terms of the response rate. So Malaysia was far ahead of everybody else, but also Ecuador, Jordan, Mexico, Armenia, Sri Lanka, Philippines. If there are representatives of these countries, I congratulate you to the commitment to the survey. Thank you very much. Now, of course, the COVID-19 has been a major disruption on the provision of TVET. We found out that 90% of respondents reported complete closure of TVET centers in their countries. But it has been even a greater disruption to types of work-based learning, such as apprenticeship training or internships, in which case it was 98% of respondents said that the training provision has been disrupted. Also, 78% of respondents mentioned that certifying exams and assessments were postponed for TVET trainees and students, in some cases even completely canceled due to the crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic. So some of the common obstacles which have been mentioned by the respondents include lack of general and technological infrastructure. So it's basically a lack of access to infrastructure and technology, but also lack of effective and familiar distance learning platforms as well as resources, and lack of staff capacity to use those resources to provide distance learning, including lack of pedagogical skills suitable for distance learning, as well as financial constraints. In terms of consequences of the COVID-19 on learning and teaching in TVET, of course, there's been difficulty with TVET students' engagement and also with keeping the standards of quality assurance when the learning format was changed to remote learning. There was also a drop in access to and affordability of TVET programs during the crisis. And this is something which has to be taken into account, that the backdrop of the losses of the household incomes, affordability becomes particularly important. And in this context, the engagement into training sometimes has been seen also as an opportunity cost. And in the situation where there was no income for the household, many opted to go for a job where studying was considered often a luxury. This all, of course, resulted in the lack of motivation, both among teachers and among students, and the rise in the dropout rate. In terms of the transition to alternative modes of training and assessment, the positive finding has been that despite all these challenges, the uptake of distance learning solutions has accelerated during the COVID-19 crisis. So we were looking actually at how the TVET providers' responses recorded the provision of online or distance learning before the crisis and during the crisis. And we found out that only 13 out of 92 countries could state that majority of TVET respondents confirmed the provision of online and distance learning, while during the crisis, this number grew to 46. This is quite impressive. However, when we speak about the differences by the country level, this has been, of course, quite a positive transition for high-income countries, where really more than 2/3 of TVET providers reported that they were delivering training entirely by remote methods during the pandemic. But unfortunately, very few countries in low-income countries were able to make that transition. And that says that actually the crisis has triggered, of course, a rapid transition, but also has revealed the wide learning gap between countries and societies, as well as the gap of equality within societies, because of course, poorer households, people who are less equipped with skills, disadvantaged groups, of course, could not benefit from online training provision to the same extent as others. Now, in terms of distance learning modalities, many countries decided to continue partial or full face-to-face training and assessment with some precautionary measures such as social distancing, wearing masks, staggering class break times, and limiting the number of students on site at the same time. However, many also opted for some online platforms and tools, providing mostly or exclusively distance or online learning. In many countries throughout the world, not only high income, but also middle and low income, did use the available platforms and resources such as MOOCs, massive open online courses, or Moodle, modular object-oriented dynamic learning environment, video tutorials, live video conferences, simulators, sometimes virtual reality, augmented reality, but more already, of course, in high-income countries. Now, in terms of offline platforms, this has been widely used, especially in developing countries. They used national television channels. They distributed assignments through the postal services, written resources such as self-paced learning guides, learning notes, and we have many examples throughout developing countries. Just to give you a few, it was DRC, Madagascar, Pakistan, they all reported these types of solutions. Already mentioned a particular challenge of provision of online, provision of the work-based learning through distance learning, where practical skills is really at the core of the TVET provision. But there also we saw some interesting solutions, such as, for example, implementing practical skills at home and uploading images or video footages for the assignment, assignments for the evaluation of teachers, which was the case of Ecuador and the Philippines, or rather preparing portfolios based on their earlier work and providing it online for the assessment by teachers. And this was the case of the New Zealand and Trinidad and Tobago. TVET institutions, of course, engaged very heavily in the provision of the response to the COVID-19. The COVID-19, to a certain extent, accelerated many trends which have been already inherently present, and created an opportunity to promote and further mobilize human and financial resources for expanding distance learning, which wasn't so popular before the crisis, as we already know. So half of TVET providers reported that additional resources have been allocated to the organizations of the creation of new materials, to the deployment of new technologies, or to the expansion of online and offline distance learning. What is particularly interesting, how TVET providers as well as TVET administrators managed to go into public-private partnerships to promptly establish the response to the COVID-19 crisis together with the private sector. So we have, again, many examples. So for example, in the Kyrgyz Republic, the operator Megacom provided complimentary SIM cards to those in need, to the disadvantaged groups, with complimentary internet for teachers at secondary school. And in Nigeria, the Ministry of Youth and Sport collaborated with IBM on the development of the online training platform. Ethiopia benefited from digital upskilling of teachers with help of Google. So these are all very encouraging examples. Many training programs and resources have been also developed as an immediate response to the COVID-19 pandemic for the sectors that experienced shortages of labor and skills. So this is something to speak about skills mismatch and fast changing situation on the labor market and how the TVET actually reacted to this specific situation on the labor market. Again, plenty of wonderful examples. So many countries reported new courses, mostly online, for the healthcare sector, as well as for other sectors, on raising awareness of health and safety measures, on hygiene, but also some vocational training providers actually turned into production, repair and maintenance of medical equipment. This, of course, was the case of mostly high and high middle income countries. Some training providers also deployed their interns and apprentices for industries that experienced labor and skill shortage. This was the case of Spain, that deployed their interns to nursing homes. And Honduras even demonstrated how they turned some of training facilities into testing and hospitalization centers for the COVID-19. Specific support measures to teachers and learners have been also very resourceful. So for teachers, of course, the support varied from just moral support to some internet access and sometimes the provision of equipment. Most important measure that has been registered throughout all countries was capacity building to help teachers and trainers provide remote training and to improve their pedagogical skills for distance learning, and also the provision of resources and technical support and help desk. So for instance, in Korea, there were special manuals and good practice examples for the provision of online learning available for teachers. In Armenia, there was a special course issued online to train 158 teachers in the course Introduction to Distance Learning at the beginning of crisis. Learners also benefited from the whole number of measures through TV, social media, websites, webinars, as well as direct contacts with individual learners. So for instance, in Malta, Public Employment Service Job Plus contacted every training participant to inform about existing training solutions. And similar measures were also introduced in many other countries. Now, in terms of implementation of pre-existing crisis response strategy, the situation does not look that good. We wanted to know whether the TVET providers or the TVET system as a whole has had some kind of the provision of measures in case of a crisis. And we found out that most of them didn't have any. So reported strategies which we found, of course, there were a few, but mostly they dealt with some general health and safety and hygiene, not specific to the training provision. and not specific to the sector of TVET as a whole. There was one exception, however, it was Australia, where the Network of Public Technical and Further Education, TAFE, so the network of these institutions highlighted that all registered with them training organizations in the country, they were legally obliged to have a critical incident policy and procedure in place available on their website. A very interesting example, and the sole example among 1,300 plus responses. Now, in terms of lessons learned, what would be important to draw from that? Of course, one positive finding is that the role of distance learning and online learning has been recognized. It has been scaled up, and it started to be appreciated by all users, and also the awareness about its qualities and its potential has been risen. However, at the same time, the experiences have been very different. So some countries came up with very innovative solutions, including virtual reality, augmented reality, and some very high-tech possibilities. However, in many countries, the infrastructure and access was not in place at all, and it resulted in a lot of frustration among the users, among teachers as well as learners, and their parents very often as well. I think a lot of us present at this webinar know this from their own experience, from schooling of their own children, for example. And this, of course, resulted also in demotivation and even very often withdrawal. So for us, the clear conclusion is that, of course, distance learning is important, but it's not the silver bullet. And the ideal form would be some kind of a blended learning for the future. And this is something what can be mainstreamed. Another lesson learned is that in this very impersonal situation, when you don't really interact directly with your counterpart, personal skills became very important. Specific social, emotional skills, behavior and values such as teamwork, such as mutual respect, such as openness to change were extremely important in the situation of crisis and helping each other through the crisis. And finally, the point which I have already made about preparedness for the future. It was a widespread recognition that development of a detailed and realistic contingency plan can make TVET providers and the overall TVET system more resilient in the future and better prepared for the future shocks. So the policy recommendations which we formulated, they have three large groups. The first one has something to do with my last point about the response readiness. And it's recommended to invest considerably and also quite urgently in the development of adequate crisis response plans for the whole education sector, but from the national level to the provider level. And of course, it would be necessary to develop also related capacities of TVET teachers, learners, managers at the institutional level as well. The second group of recommendations has something to do with the issue of access to education and training, because the COVID-19 crisis has vividly revealed the inequalities in access to infrastructure and connectivity. And this is something that has to be improved and improved quite urgently, as well as thinking about which groups are particularly disadvantaged and which groups need particular targeted approach in the policy measures. It would be necessary to invest in developing and maintaining easy access to distance learning platforms as well, learning spaces, and also to collaborate further with private providers, private entities in the education technology provision. We saw many very positive examples, and this is something to learn from and to mainstream in the system. The third group of the recommendation has something to do with how TVET can provide skills that are relevant to overcoming the crisis in the future, delivering relevant training and building skills to build back better from the crisis. Adapting to the changing situation in the economy would be important, and labor market and society, and making sure that TVET provides relevant skills in any situation. Mainstreaming successful emerging innovations that we have recorded throughout the whole world into the TVET system is equally important, because many of those good practices may remain as just the crisis measure, while it's really worthful including them into the mainstream system in the training provision. Also, strengthening the system of the validation and recognition of all forms of learning would be very important. Micro-credential, digital badges, already mentioned by Omar, because we all started appreciating the possibilities of taking up learning online of all forms, formal and informal, and very often this type of learning is not certified and recognized, and therefore systems of recognition will have to catch up with the situation. And finally, we need to recognize also the role of TVET in providing reskilling and upskilling opportunities to workers to build back better, rebuild the economy, and make sure that people are put back to work. Thank you very much, and over to you, Sang-Kyun.
Thank you, Olga. Very comprehensive overview of the key finding of the report. I'm very conscious of time, so let me actually move on to the panel discussion. The Olga already presented the key findings of the survey. That's as of the April, May last year. I really want to hear from our panelists about what has happened afterwards. So what kind of actions and measures has been taken since the survey. So I'm very pleased to have today I have a very great actual panelist here from the policymakers and also TVET providers and our social partners. So let me begin with the Mr. Bilguday Darisuk Bata. Sorry, but I'm not very good at pronouncing your name. He is the expert, a specialist on the TVET Policy Implementation and Coordination Department and the Ministry of the Labor and Social Protection and Mongolia. So it's already very late actually in your time. So thank you very much for joining us. So I have two questions. First question is that what are the new policies, especially since the survey was done? You actually introduced to encourage or support the initial or continuing vocational training in response to the crisis. So what are the new measures you introduced? That's number one. Number two is that how is your ministry preparing to address the aftermath of the COVID-19 and to strengthen the resilience and responsiveness of the TVET system to the future shock? So with that, okay, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, and good evening again. It's like 10 p.m. in Mongolia, and thanks for inviting us. Thanks for Mongolia for panelists in this webinar. So first of all, I'd like to highlight that Mongolia had contained the local transmission of the pandemic until the mid-November of the last year, and which was one of the best practices in the world. So since the pandemic was approved in the world, in Mongolia, we closed all forms of classroom training and schooling since the last January. And in the initial time, we faced many obstacles and challenges. And one of the main obstacles that I would like to highlight was the graduation of the spring semester of that year. And it was quite challenging because in that time, the trainees must have involved in internship right before they graduate. For sure, the most special function of the vocational education is on-site, like work-based training and improving their hand-dreaming skills, right? So with the intention of reaching the goal of supplying skilled workforce to the labor market, the government of Mongolia implemented a pilot on-site training model within the cooperation of social partnership, for instance, by involving up to 3 interns on one site under the strict pandemic regulation. We had the potential risk to assess and certify those trainees, but we did the assessment of those trainees' qualification and ability successfully within the support of our donor organizations as well as employers. And surprisingly, the result was better than we expected, and those trainees were called as the first vocational education training graduates during the pandemic period. and which the above was one of the short-term policy that we introduced to support vocational training at the initial stage. And the another policy that we implemented since the survey is for sure developing the online learning platform in order to reach the sustainability of the TVET system, right? So frankly saying, the Mongolia had not quite experience of digital-based learning method, specifically in TVET sector. And in the beginning of the pandemic period, we had faced the massive challenges and obstacles, but within support of social partnership, once again, we figured out by developing, for example, the management information system, which is called MIS. It's like TVET, like whole digital system, which includes all stakeholders, as well as the resource pool and database of the curriculum. So one of the main lists that we faced was the digital divide, for sure. I guess it's common for most of the developing countries. And of course, digital literacy and ensuring access for all stakeholders. So what I'm saying is like 2020 was like kind of one of the piloting year in Mongolia for TVET sector. So regarding the second question, I'd like to underline that at this moment, the government of the Mongolia is approaching the digital transformation in every sector, including TVET, with the purpose of strengthening the resilience and responsiveness of TVET. So regarding that, we've been focusing on the main areas, such as the preparing the database of the curricula for the future shock based on blended learning method with the reflection of hybrid learning approach. And another focus area is the gap analysis on the digital skills of trainers, teachers, trainees, and as well as employers, like all the stakeholders. And for sure, digital quality management tools for TVET providers, and improving advanced e-learning platform based on international good practices, and improving the preparedness of the TVET sector's facility by renovating and repairing the workshop or dormitory buildings in order to meet the occupational safety and hygiene requirement under the COVID-19 regulation, right? And another thing is strengthening the digital literacy, which is very important for sure, for example, in developing countries. So digital literacy of all TVET stakeholders is very crucial. And for sure, introduce the flexible short-term courses based on the employer's need. In Mongolia, the TVET courses are from 1 to 3 years. I mean, the duration of the courses. But what the government is planning is the training course must be very flexible based on the employer's need. So we must focus on those areas in the furthermore. So within the two questions from your side, that's all I wanted to come with. And thanks very much once again for inviting Mongolia in this important webinar. And thank you once again.
Thank you so much. It's very, very interesting to see how actually this pandemic provides a bit of opportunity for the Mongolia to think really carefully and more seriously about the digital learning. And I can see some of the questions from the conversation box about how can we introduce digital learning in a very low income countries. And so the Mongolia will provide some good example to that. So I encourage all the panelists actually to respond to the questions actually raised for your session. So then actually let me move on to our panelists from the TVET providers. And we have really privileged to have the Miss Arlene Verena, the beauty Borle, National Service for Industrial Training, the Senai from Brazil, and also the Mr. Ahmad Ibrahim, the Vocational Training and Employment Center from Egypt. And so both of them are actually the TVET providers. So I'm going to raise the same question, and then I will ask each of you actually provide your answer. So the first question, I mean, there is nothing surprising for you. What are the new practice and measures implemented to address the challenges faced in the delivery of TVET, particularly for practical skills training and assessment? The question number 2 is that the report, as the Olga presented, captured some innovation in new training programs and learning platform and resource mobilization in the TVET during the pandemic. So how do you see the possibility of the mainstreaming those actually emerging innovation into regular TVET program? I'm particularly interested in these questions. So let me first invite, say, the Alain actually to give your response, and then I'm going to invite the Ahmed afterwards. So Alain, over to you. Aline, over to you. Floor is yours. Some technical issues, then perhaps we can start with Ahmed.
Yes, sure. Thank you. It's my pleasure. And as a TVET provider, let me just explain that we are a mediator between two customers. The first customer is the demand side, which is represented in each country by the small and medium enterprises. In most cases, big corporates, they find their ways of recruitment, but our customers are small part of those corporates. Also, one of the main part of the demand that we are dealing with or we are serving, that the informality that is founded in our economy as a developing country. On the other side, we have the supply side, which is the job seekers, what we call them, or apprentice, or what's called educational attainment, and those new graduates of schools. VTech basically is an employment and TVET provider service. Along this model, we provide pathways to employment. Our main target is to reduce the gap, and you know that the gap is already there, and sometimes it's increasing as we are facing now because of the changes on the labor market structure or products or innovation or so on. So let me start earlier. In November 2019, we had a meeting in our executive committee, and this meeting was basically to review our activities in 2019 and produce a report. This report will help us improve our services in 2020. And basically, this report included three things or three main topics. The first one is the success that we have achieved, the challenges we have faced, and also our eye on the future of work. And, ironically, we didn't see this pandemic coming, but, we were looking into the future, but we didn't expect this pandemic. This pandemic, what's really special about it, it hits the most vulnerable people the most. As Olga previously mentioned, that the developing countries face so many challenges related to technical delivery of education, gender equality, technological infrastructure, and so on. So luckily, we had strategies not for crisis, but for future. And those strategies helped us very much in adapting very quickly to the new norms. So we had put some kind of task force. This task force was based on three main pillars. The first one is to respond to the pandemic very quickly. And the second pillar is to recover and sustain. The third one is to rebuild and reset our activities according to the new norms that we are facing in the whole world. So luckily, we had so many international partners. We value this partnership very much, and each partner was keen to make a difference and innovate in some ways to respond to this pandemic. And to start with ILO, we worked with ILO in developing apprenticeship program for refugees and hosting community. And this program was expanded very much as we were facing some restrictions and health and safety regulation receiving apprentice to our premises. So instead of receiving the apprentice in our center, we sent them right away to the corporates, and they were already, in an urgent need for new laborers and new workers. So this is one pillar. The other pillar, we have the GIZ, and we also cooperated with the GIZ in improving the dual education as a way of transforming and connecting the TVET education and reduce the gap very much, and it's been a very successful model. We have also the IECD, or the Mediterranean New Chance, and we together work in a new segment of new graduates of technical schools, and they actually provided them with SIM cards where they were able to connect to internet very easily and receive our training program. So we have working in so many levels, but our delivery of service has been changed a little bit to adapt with the new situation, like focusing more on core working skills about using gamification and online content as a way of learning method. Also expand the apprenticeship program. That's all I think from my side, and we are hoping that the coming year will help some, will be holding a better future for all of us. Thank you, and my pleasure.
Thank you. I mean, that's thank you very much. Yeah, you provide already lots of insight. Okay, what can be done actually during this such a difficult time. Actually, I appreciate your comments on the how you continue to organize apprenticeship as well. So, Arlene, do you hear us?
Yes, I can hear now. Sorry.
Yeah, over to you, Arlene. Floor is yours.
Yeah, I hope technology will support me this time. So, good morning to everybody from Brazil. I'm representing Senai today. It's a pleasure for me to be here. So I will go forward directly to the first question. Senai counts in the last years with almost 2.5 million enrollments per year. This means a big responsibility in the field of education for the TVET sector of the country, but in particular for the Brazilian industry. When the pandemic started in Brazil in the mid of March 2020, technical courses have been paused for, I would say, not even 3 weeks completely. Senai showed a really fast reaction and answered with a high flexibilization of the curricula. That means that in the first moment, we anticipated theoretical input to gain time for the development of digital content in that occupations where we lacked it. With this, we managed to guarantee a relatively smooth running of the trainings. Besides that, we understood very quickly how important it was to give to the current and potential Senai students a positive sign to continue studying and not quit for economic or personal motivation reasons. We increased significantly our free of charge distance course and training offer on our site, and gave many people the chance and the motivation to continue at least with their education. In the end of August 2020, we basically returned to the practical skills and trainings parts, complying with strict hygiene and sanitation regulations. Professors, students, and administration and cleaning staff all received extensive hygiene trainings to guarantee a safe working and testing environment. Evaluating now all these measures and actions, we are drawing a quite positive balance of this exceptional year, as we managed to keep enrollments and student numbers quite stable at Senai, and that means in Brazil. So this is what I wanted to contribute to the first question. In regards to the second and the innovations that we introduced and let's say continue with them, I can say that Senai's virtual site and distance learning offer was expanded significantly in 2020. The offer ranges from wide information on all kinds of industrial professions, technical courses, a virtual shop for all Senai education products and programs, a big selection of free of charge educational resources, a mentoring program for free of charge professional orientation, and an industry's vacancy sections for job-seeking students. In addition, Senai created a second integrated platform for Senai pedagogic staff. This space is designed to help Senai professors to create digital content for the lessons and to share this content with the whole teachers community in order to create synergies. Also, many different online courses were designed, all related to the topic how to become a more digital teacher, to help enabling teachers with the new technologies and the new pedagogical concepts behind. Saga Senai is a digital innovation hub where companies can put real-world challenges or problems that will be addressed from an interdisciplinary Senai students team. Product development or competitions, all these modalities happen already in a virtual format. Besides that, pandemic helped to streamline topics related to virtual and already mentioned augmented reality that are used basically for the practical skills trainings a lot nowadays. In some areas, like for example, welding, we have been working with simulators already for a long time. This became not only important now in the pandemic time. Senai luckily understood already some years ago how essential it is to stimulate the students, including those in the more, let's say, practical hands-on professions, for the new technologies that are nowadays dominating, I would say, all our industries. So this is basically what I wanted to contribute from our side. Let me thank again and let me pass the word to you.
Thank you so much, Ellie. That's a very, it's very actually revealing, actually, the how actually you managed to get through this difficult time while maintaining certain level of the education and training opportunity for all. That's very impressive, I must say. And now, actually, I'm going to turn to our social partners. I mean, one thing I want to say in the very beginning is that the issue of the training and education, especially as actually subject for the social dialogue, wasn't particularly strong. But I'm very pleased. I mean, in recent years, I mean, social dialogue on this topic is getting stronger and stronger in the context of future work and also in the context of pandemic. So it's a perfect opportunity to listen to the views from our social partners. First, let me invite the Anna Markovic from the Montenegro Employers Federation. Again, I have two questions for you. Don't be worried, it's going to be easy one for you. The first one is what are the recent initiatives that reported since the survey to support the employers to train their employees or to continue offering apprenticeship and internship traineeship of the placement? I'm personally very interested in this question. And number two is that what types of support on the step training and development and apprenticeship and traineeship would be needed to handle the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic? So I think it's going to be relatively easy for you, Anna. So over to you.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. It is my pleasure to be able to participate at such a global event and invited by the ILO to represent a small country such as Montenegro. So to be very specific and very concrete, because I think in 4 minutes it's really not much time to answer everything, but I'll be very concrete. So when we speak about recent and some new initiatives for supporting employers to train their employees or to continue offering apprenticeship or traineeship placements, unfortunately there were no new initiatives in Montenegro. But the good thing is that the regular initiatives regarding the dual education system and regarding the traineeship schemes for higher education graduates actually remained. So it's quite positive, since the impact of COVID-19 crisis on Montenegrin economy was immense, and we are lucky actually that the government didn't actually introduce any cuts to the funds available through those regular traineeship schemes available. So I have to also point out that we are pretty new in this apprenticeship system. So we introduced the dual education system 4 years ago. So we now have 300 employers included in the system, and the majority of those apprenticeship placements are actually in the tourism-oriented and in the services sector. And having in mind that our services sector, since we are the tourism-oriented country, was quite hit by the crisis, so it resulted in the closure of enterprises in tourism sector. Then those dual education system was also very much disrupted, especially those work-based learning components of the dual education system, because it was actually impossible to organize the students' placements in the enterprises that were closed. But here I would like to mention one particular measure that was introduced by the government, and I think it can be related with a support, with a kind of a support that employers actually needed at this time. So it was there were subsidies for new employment that were introduced by the government back in April, right after the first wave of the epidemic in Montenegro. And it meant that those entrepreneurs and those SMEs who employ new employees, those actually that unemployed persons that were registered at the employment agency, actually the government subsidized their wages in the amount of 70% of the gross minimum wage. The positive continuation of this measure actually happened a couple of days ago, when the government actually adopted a new package of support measure to employers. And this particular measure, so for new employment, was revised and expanded. So it now covers the period of 3 years after the new employment. It means that the government will cover the taxes and contributions of those newly employed in the amount of 90% of the gross average wage in the country in the first year, and then in the amount of 60 and 30% of their wages in the second and third year after the new employment. Regarding your second question, I would say that what's actually needed for enterprises and SMEs in this period of crisis are the greater support by the government when it comes to staff training, especially in acquiring digital skills. Whether it is those digital skills related to maybe implementation or introduction of some new digital platforms by those companies, or so on. And when it comes to cooperation, as you mentioned, I mean, in the introductory words, the social dialogue is really important in TVET. So I would say that to be able to deal with the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, we should build stronger partnerships between TVET providers and the very employers included in TVET education. What I mean by that is that they need to work together to actually alleviate the impact of the crisis on those crucial component of the dual education training in Montenegro, that is the work-based learning. So our system is definitely, as I said at the beginning, is disrupted because the most of the placements in dual educations are oriented towards services sector, and I have to say that at the very end of this initial address by my side is that according to the official statistics, we have in the second quarter 2020, the tourism revenues actually declined by 95%. So it's a great number, and it actually tells a lot about how our economy is, how our economy was influenced by the crisis, and how it also influenced the TVET system, since it is also oriented towards tourism and service-based sectors. So it is all from me for now. So if you have any additional questions, I'll be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. So I particularly appreciate your reference to some of the sector-specific situation like tourism. That actually has been quite an important issue during the pandemic. So then let me turn to the Martin Hamney from the Education International. I have seen lots of the statement from the Education International during the pandemic. you raised a very important voice and the concerns and even proposing lots of the solutions actually for consideration. So here are a question for you. Number one is that how has the pandemic affected TVET teachers and trainers and other education and training staff in terms of their working conditions and access to pedagogical resources and access to training? Number two is what kind of support for TVET teachers and trainers and other education and training staff would you like to see in the context of the current crisis? So I know you have all the statement already issued on these topics. So over to you, Martin.
Thanks, Sang-Hun. I'm going to refer to a couple of pieces of evidence. Teaching with Tech is a report we've just put out, the role of education unions in shaping the future. And I'll also be speaking about the futures of work, what education can and can't do, which is a paper that was written by Buchanan et al. For the Futures of Education initiative. And I agree with most of what Olga said, but not everything. So I'm also going to pick up a couple of points from the ILO in the spirit of the dynamism with which this panel represents different perspectives. I must say that I can agree with what my employer colleague has just said. And we do believe that strong TVET institutions are at the heart of the solution. And they should be able to develop relationships with employers in communities, in real time, and in a human way. I'm going to start with the workload question, because in our Teaching with Tech report, we did get evidence from education unions around the world, and we had a very big response rate representing over 20 million teachers, and it gives a really clear sense of where people are going with this. There were three things that were the biggest issues for teachers in terms of well-being. Number one was workload intensification, which as a result of the pandemic has been exponential. And if you think about having kids at home as well as teaching a whole load of kids online, you can imagine the pressures that you are under. I've been a teacher most of my career, and I was lucky enough to miss the pandemic because it must have been a very challenging and difficult time. And we have a lot of evidence from many countries that that's the case. In the second issue that is of most importance to teachers is health concerns, and that is techno stress. And while digital platforms and digital learning give opportunities, they also develop digital fatigue and give digital pain, as well as providing different ways of working. So teachers are telling us clearly that that's the case. And the third was work-life balance, that there are issues about your ability to make sure that you continue to develop and grow as a whole human being. And the human-centered future that the ILO have been very clear about in their Future of Work Commission, whose report I suggest you all read if you haven't read it already, is a very strong piece of work. And it gives us a sense of where things are going in terms of the future of work. And I want to also pick up on Ahmed's discussion around that, because the future of work is absolutely critical to all of us, that we're responding and responsive. Pedagogical resources, teachers unions tell us they are not getting enough PLD support in this area. And Olga pointed this out, that actually we are nowhere near the place where we need to be if we're going to support teachers. And we've also got to create digital platforms. Now, where I would sort of part ways is on that public-private partnership issue. We believe that the government has a responsibility to provide platforms. I do think there are places where teachers can helpfully and successfully work with private providers, particularly small ones we find. And if you look at what education can and can't do, they're quite critical of Google and what Google do around their Google University and what have you. And the other thing that I would critique is digital badges or things that are being presented as learning, which aren't certified by qualified teachers and don't lead to coherent pathways. Because I think one thing we must do as we work through the situation around TVET closed down and TVET opening up again is that we must be coherent in our response. If we put atomized and piecemeal responses on the table, we're not going to get the right solutions. And I just refer you to one image, which is always stays in my mind, is if I'm learning how to put a toilet in, I can't do that virtually. I actually need to know how the pipe connects to the toilet and how I'm going to make that all come together. And I taught many Māori students in Wainuiomata who went on to become plumbers. So having had that experience, it's something that I always come back to. Blended learning and hybrid learning, I've noticed the questions in the chat about, and I do want to pick up both those issues, because if you take the OECD definition of blended learning, it was originally intended to be an equity support, so that if you had blended learning going on in the classroom, you had students who were ahead of the game, engaged in a digital way with learning, so that the teacher could then pay more attention to the students who weren't quite up with where they should be. Hybrid learning also can enter usefully a similar space. I don't think you can replace the human relationship that you get with a teacher. And I will pick something else up that's come up in the chat, which is about soft skills. How do you actually teach soft skills in a digital world? Well, you can only do it through community. If there isn't a sense of community between students and each other, which if you've had face-to-face contact, you can develop quite successfully. If you've never had face-to-face contact, it's actually really difficult to develop a sense of community, all based on a digital frame. It's possible, but it requires a lot more support. I think that by providing opportunities for teachers to work with each other on these areas, so platforms where they can build on each other's expertise and keep developing the profession, you're going to get a stronger response. I've got an eye on the time, so I'm just going to round off. I do think that there is one other thing I have to mention, and being the workers' representative, if I didn't, I wouldn't be supporting my colleagues very well, is the whole importance of stable job contracts and job stability. TVET and ECE actually are the two sectors where you have the biggest pressure on teachers and the most precarious conditions. And many are on short-term contracts without clarity about how their skills are developing over a career lifeline. You need to fix that, because actually you've got to have surety in terms of that coherence, and they need to have strong pathways which enable you to move from TVET to university and back again, so that there's more fluidity between the different options available. I want to thank you for inviting me and being open to the spirit of consultation across different groups. And I'm happy to follow up on any of the points raised. And the one thing I will finish on is that you must make sure that professional autonomy is at the center of the TVET solution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martin. I will clearly remember your last sentence. I mean, that is going to be my takeaway message from your intervention. So we heard very clearly from our panel, excellent panelists, I must say. And then when I look at the Q&A box, I'm so impressed. There are so many questions. So it's almost impossible to respond to each of those actually important questions. So what I'm going to do is that I have already asked our key contributor from the three agencies, ILO, World Bank, and UNESCO, to share their some thoughts very quickly, 2 minutes. And then if time allows, I'm getting back to our panelists for very quick, short response and comments, perhaps 1 minute. I know it's tough, but as I said, I'm normally a generous person, but this time I have to be very tough. Okay, so let me first ask the Olga. You have seen some questions and also panel discussion, so you can give some thoughts, I mean, at this stage, very quickly for 2 minutes. Over to you, Olga.
Thank you, Shankar. There have been 38 questions, so I cannot possibly answer all of them, but let me just give you maybe some ideas. So there were questions about distance learning modalities. And in fact, I have to clarify that we didn't really ask about the modalities of distance learning itself, apart from distinguishing online and offline, because offline was particularly important for developing countries with different forms of homeschooling, with the support of either TV channels or postal services or other types of support. we didn't look into the types like modular distance learning. This was not the sort of preoccupying question of the survey. And there was a question about flipped classroom and how it's compared to hybrid or blended learning. So flipped classroom is really one of types of blended learning, which grants students quite substantial engagement and it really increases their role in the classroom activities, assuming that all the prep work has been done before, with the use of some type of distance learning. So there is no contradiction there, but again, we didn't ask about the specific forms, specific modalities. So it was really rather the distance learning in general. Now, many people were asking about quality of distance learning, and of course it has been affected. I have underlined that many times, especially when it comes to the delivery of practical skills, work-based learning. It has been affected tremendously. There was a question about how distance learning is appropriate for different age groups. Since we dealt with TVET, we didn't really engage into childhood education. And I do agree with you that distance learning, especially online learning, is not suitable for all ages. And I totally agree with Martin about the digital stress, the digital fatigue that comes out of that. I think many people who are present here and who are parents, they all experienced that during the lockdown, if the lockdown was the case in their country. So of course, this is all the limitations, especially when it comes to practical training. And there is much to do still. And we have to recognize that distance learning is not a silver bullet. We cannot apply it to all forms of training. And that really that personal face-to-face interaction between teacher and learner is indispensable. We cannot really substitute it with any of the most profound technology of the world. It's not possible. Then about the role of employability, what we call core employability skills in the ILO, such as teamwork, communication, and how this can be trained online. Of course, it's a challenge, the same as with practical skills, but there are ways to implement them. And there is actually a very special role for teacher, where this is exactly the professional autonomy comes in. And this is exactly where the future of work concept of a human-centered approach comes in, because that will have to be teacher-centered and learner-centered. Teacher-centered in terms of providing support to teachers of all possible kinds, especially capacity development, help desks and resources, but also to learners having this kind of diversified approach to learner, because they all happen to be in very different situations, especially learners who happen to be in disadvantaged family situations, in low-income households. They are not really, their situation is not comparable to others. I think, look, let me interrupt here, because I think maybe colleagues from the World Bank and UNESCO would like to add. And if there is still time, I can come in on more questions to answer. Thank you, Sangho.
Thank you, Olga. I think the Hervé, are you online?
Yes.
Okay, let me invite the Hervé who take motion. He is the session chief of the UNESCO on the youth and literacy and skills development. So he is a key person actually from the UNESCO on this joint work. So Hervé, so you can share some thoughts with us. I mean, you heard a lot of questions.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And I think we are all key, and notably from the field perspective from country, I think the discussion was great here to hear and to have a feedback about also the survey. I think I agree with mainly what was said before, and I saw some question regarding how organization can further think and support member state in this critical crisis. I think it's of course of high importance, because we know that the crisis is still ongoing, and we are still in a recovery phase. And we should think and support the need for building resilience for the TVET system at country level. I think it's by saying this, we should further collaborate among various partners. Here we are with World Bank, ILO, and UNESCO, but there are many collaboration ongoing also in parallel ways, and they are all complementary. So there is a high need to connect the dots, I would say, because here we are on the angle of a TVET system, let's say. We have over evidence-based related to enterprises and the impact of the COVID on enterprises, but also on other issues. So it's important to collaborate, to communicate, to further strengthen peer learning, and it's beyond the organization, I would say, beyond our own organization, but it's critical to develop partnership with critical partners who have some very relevant tools to develop, for example, distance learning modalities, including digital platforms, but not only. So I would say that we should further learn from the lesson learned, so from bad and good practices, to share them among agencies and notably between countries, so that we can all think how we can develop a relevant strategy for building resilience at country level and among, sometimes when it is needed, between countries. I mean, at sub-regional or regional levels. It's critical because it was highlighted in the recommendation that strategies to face crisis were not enough developed or put in place. So we should build on the lesson learned to build this strategy. It's critical. In parallel, we should further support capacity building. I think it's critical for policymakers, teachers, but if it's possible, I think we should also support training for youth and adults. And for this, I would like to mention that we have a critical, a very useful partnership at UNESCO and among our agency. There is question on how our organization can support this crisis. I would like to highlight that we put in place at UNESCO very visible and useful platform. I mean the Global Education Coalition. You can go on the website and see all what is available. We have for now more than 140 partners involved in the Global Coalition, Education Coalition. And in this framework, we have launched since July 2020 what we call the Global Skills Academy. That is a unique platform of connecting various agencies from the UN family, but also private sectors, academia, and civil society. So we work together, and we are able to provide online training for youth and adults. We have a very ambitious target for June, July 2021, targeting to train about 1 million youth and adults. And the partnership between private sectors and let's say the development world is very critical, and we are about, for example, to reach more than 100,000 youth and adult trained by this partner. So this information is related also to the question to quality. If we definitely work with key partners, very famous and operational partners like Microsoft, IBM, Huawei, and others. We have also the French platform called PIX. We are quite sure that we can provide high quality distance learning. So this is a key modality that can be further pushed. I like also the idea mentioned by Martin about using technology, teaching for tech, with tech. I think this is something that we can also develop. I think we have all seen the importance of technology, and I'm quite sure that maybe we use only 20–30% of available technology, or other modalities to develop distance learning. So I can see, yes, of course, challenges that we highlighted, but also a lot of opportunities to support at the high level policy level, but also to solve training challenges for youth and adults, and it's critical. So building resilience is also key. I will stop here. I hope I was not too long, but I can add, but give the floor back. Thanks.
Thanks, this is the perfect actually the segue actually to introduce Victoria Levin. She is the World Bank senior economist. Actually, she's in education and global practice and the co-lead of the Skills Global Solution Group. So I know it's tough, but Victoria, if you can share your thoughts like for 2 minutes, but I would appreciate that. Okay, over to you, Victoria.
Thank you so much. And I'll be really brief because I think my colleagues from ILO and UNESCO have already answered most of the questions. And it was great to see the active discussion, both in the panel and in our Q&A session. And it's great actually from the panelists to put some voices and faces to the responses that we saw in the survey and to hear from them the updates of the interventions or the policies that have been implemented in the country. So many thanks to everyone. One question that I saw in the Q&A, well, actually more than one question. It was I would say a group of questions related to pretty much frustration with many participants coming from developing countries on how to improve access to digital learning when internet connectivity and access to smart devices cannot really be relied on. So at the World Bank, we're definitely very sensitive when we advise our client countries on this issue. And we usually think of sort of the short-term and the long-term approaches. So in the long-term approaches, as Olga was mentioning in her presentation, it is about improving the digital infrastructure. It is about boosting the digital skills of both teachers and learners. In the short term, we were advising multimodal approaches, basically thinking about the context of the learners and trying to deliver learning continuity to them in order to make sure, and I think the panelist from Brazil mentioned this, that no one stops learning just because they don't have access to a digital platform. So this is one thing that I wanted to mention. Another point that I wanted to pick up on from what Olga was saying and Hervé as well mentioned is the importance of partnerships to make sure that the training systems are responsive to the current skills needs, as well as thinking through the emerging skills needs that would emerge after the crisis. So we think that this is very important for all stakeholders to be thinking about. And then finally, picking up on what Omar mentioned in the beginning, we're working with the same partners, with ILO and with UNESCO, on a more long-term approach to rebuilding back better TVET systems. And here I wanted to pick up on what Martin was saying in his remarks. It resonated a lot, and this is some of the themes that we're going to be doing a deep dive on. So how technology can actually be used to improve the quality and the relevance of TVET, how teachers can be better trained, better recruited in the system, how can they be better supported to provide this quality TVET training? How do we go about identifying skills needs and assessing skills needs, especially in this changing environment? How do we improve the apprenticeships and work-based learning systems? And finally, how do we support the assessment and certification of skills? So all of these we're working on, and you can stay tuned. Hopefully we'll have more details for you coming relatively soon. Thank you so much to everyone.
Thank you so much, Victoria. That's wonderful. We are running late, but as I promised, I am going to ask each of the panelists to speak very briefly, just a takeaway messages, no more than 1 minute. And so I would really appreciate it, because we have to conclude our webinar so within 10 minutes. So I would appreciate your collaboration on that. So let me first invite the Birguday. Are you still online, I hope? it's
For sure,
okay.
Mr.
Go ahead.
Okay, so so regarding the questions from Q&A, I just want to share the opinion that overcoming the pandemic situation, especially in TVET sector, for sure everybody's talking about like digital transformation, and some people talking about like lack of the experience or like economy, like less economy, poor economy. But one thing is very important is social partnership, I would say, because like preparing the skilled workforce and supplying them to the labor market is not only the responsibility of the state, but it's also responsible for all stakeholders, more specifically the employer side. So what I want to say is to overcome this situation, the employer's responsibility must play the main role in order to reach the goal. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So, the Ahmed.
Yes, I would add to what Belgodi said, that we are now more than any time else, we need social innovation, we need collective efforts, we need partnerships and networking, that we will be able in the future to face any situation with a very flexible strategies to recover and to adjust. So that's what I have in mind. Thank you all.
Perfect. So, Aline, actually, your concluding thought, please.
Yes, I would refer myself to what Ms. Victoria said. I think there's short-term solutions and long-term solutions. For the short term, we have to think what is possible now. And I think two main factors are really, we have to work with the teachers. We have to prepare them because this is a completely new time that we are facing now. And we have to admit this. And we have to put our effort in this, in the capacitation of the teachers. And as a second thing, how can we really reach the majority of the people? And that now I'm talking as a low-income country, because Brazil is a low-income country. It has also high income, but yeah, it's in the middle. Here I can speak. What we have as an advantage is people are really keen on technology. This is a good point, is positive. In Brazil, almost everybody has a smartphone. Yeah, if you can afford the smartphone is another question. But so, for example, our short-term strategy is offering the most possible on mobile devices. This is not the optimal solution forever, but for now, it's what we have, and we are facing on this, and then we are facing on more long-term solutions. So this is what I wanted to conclude now from my side, and yeah, thanks to you over again.
Thank you so much. Now actually let's move on to our social partners. Anna, so for your concluding thoughts, please.
Yes. I mean, I would have to agree with a colleague from Mongolia that social partnership is important, and I would also like to add that maybe the TVET. I mean, is facing the most challenging obstacles at these times, you know, because it's easy to maybe provide and to partner. For example, I'll give you the example, a short one from Montenegro. I mean, as soon as we closed down schools, our Ministry of Education actually partnered with the technological company, and the digital platform for general education subject was introduced, and the contents were broadcasted over the television. But it was not possible for the TVET system. TVET providers done it themselves. They use their own platforms. I mean, schools use their own platforms. So I would say the challenges remained the greatest for the TVET providers and the TVET education in general. So that's why I would emphasize once again that the stronger partnership between employers and TVET providers must be built, and especially for in Montenegro, because we established the dual education system only 3 years ago. So it is the most important for us now to keep pace, you know, not to lose and not to break the continuity of the dual education system.
Thank you so much, Anna. So Martin, you have a privilege to speak last.
Thank you. Just on the modalities question, which a number of people have brought up, we found in our first COVID survey that multiple modalities were better for students and teachers than single modalities. So where there's only one way of communicating with the learner, it's more narrowing. So if you're able to do it through different platforms and different approaches, but more expensive, of course. And my big takeaway is 73% of our unions are not consulted around the governance of digital technology or data or tech. And we believe that there should be a stronger role in governance, assessment and monitoring of tech by teachers' unions. So to pick up on the partnership point made by my colleagues, that partnership also has to involve getting the teachers in the room, because it's no good talking to the tech company from a Ministry of Education office. You need to get teachers involved so you've got the classroom perspective on that as well. Nothing about us without us. Thanks.
That's brilliant. Thank you. We are now at the concluding part of this webinar, which I found rich, lots of insight, lots of the lessons and experience. So I cannot possibly summarize all the discussions today, but fortunately I have a boy and Chakul. He is the director of the UNESCO Policies and Lifelong Learning Systems Division. So he will do all these tough jobs on behalf of all of us. So over to you, boy.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to you and all colleagues. I would like to confirm that this webinar was really very rich, and thank you to all the panelists, to Olga and to other colleagues who presented to us quite important outcomes of the survey, but also added element of discussion. I would like to highlight a few things that I think, first of all, what mentioned in the discussion that I think could enrich our debate and take forward further the outcome of what came from the meeting today. First, I would like again to congratulate the partnership. We have managed to work collaboratively during the last few months, and it was a very important that ILO, the World Bank, and UNESCO put hand in hand to work together and advance this type of survey analysis that is much needed both for policymakers, but also for practitioners, and including for the teachers as well. There is an aspect that it came, but I think was less obvious. According to our data, broadly speaking, we have in average 100 days of education institution closure. The learning losses are huge, and the learning losses will have a downstream impact in terms of economy, labor market, but also lifelong learning opportunities. And what we didn't hear from, and of course, it is related to when we have collected this data, but obviously one, I would say, important aspect that all countries and all policymakers will have to take on board is what remedial learning happen, how we will offset the learning losses, so that particularly the most marginalized, the 500 million learners didn't have access to any form of connectivity, we have to cope with the situation. So I think the learning losses is for me an important aspect that we would need to look at, and obviously I hope that this is part of the discussion going forward. The second aspect that is also important, and it's not related to the period where we collected the data again, is what resources are going to TVET? How much financing is going to TVET? Very little. When we look at the implication in terms of the crisis on the public budget, there is a loss in terms of the resources allocated to education and training broadly. Companies are in a very difficult situation, so the capacity to leverage the tax on the payroll and other form of resources are thin. What is most worrying is that when looked at the stimulus packages across a wide range of countries, the part is allocated to education and skills development is less than 1% of the stimulus packages. And I think it's our role to advocate to make the case for investing in skills development, so that the ones that are that lost some of the learning, that are at risk of losing their jobs, that will have difficulty to transit to the labor market, will get support. And of course, it has to be done with the stakeholders, with the social partners, as we to mention them. And as Martin said, it has to be inclusive process of consultation with the key actors, including teaching staff, managers, and head of institutions as well. The other aspect that I wanted to mention is about the capacity to anticipate and understand the changing labor market. We have difficulties to understand how vaccination will happen, where are how the pandemic is going.
Brian, there seems to be somebody, we can't hear you very well.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now it's okay.
Okay, sorry. So I was saying that the labor market changes would be an important aspect that we would need to look. But maybe, and I would like to finish with that. We have conducted a survey when we were in a response phase, meaning countries were closing their education system and trying to find solution to maintain the learning continuity. I believe that we need to think about how we can move toward the recovery phase and what will be needed in terms of action and policy interventions, in terms of the resilience building, and in terms of reimagining TVET and vocational training and skills development more broadly. We know that we have to rethink, and Martin was referring to the future of education work. Of course, ILO colleagues have built an important work on the future of work itself. But it's very important that we think about those new phases, from responses to recovery, to resilience building, and to reimagining vocational training and skills development. And I hope that, and this is my last word, as part of collaboration, we can continue this type of work of data collection, monitoring how countries are responding, and providing opportunity to share these lessons learned, the data that is coming, because we are lacking data to support countries in their action and their policy intervention. Thank you very much, and we look forward for continued collaboration with ILO, World Bank, and other partners in this context. Thank you.
Indeed, Vohan, thank you so much. This is not the end of our collaboration. Actually, we have another webinar on the career guidance on the 17th February. Actually, we present the result of our joint work again. So I encourage all the participants actually to stay tuned and then attend this actually very exciting webinar as well. So let me thank again for all the speakers who were all great, and also the panelists and also interpreters and also audience actually for participation. I also want to thank the Olga and also Hagen in particular for organizing this excellent seminar. So I think, Olga, if you have any couple of words to make as a conclusion, so over to you. So then my job is done. Olga, over to you.
Thank you, Sanghon. Just to thank all the participants for your interest. We have had a great turnout, and all panelists for your wonderful contribution. Just two things which I wanted to say at the end, because there were questions about the role of international organizations, how we can help the situation to move. So from the side of the ILO, we have prioritized the area of digital transformation for the next program and budget period, 2022-2023. So there will be one particular outcome on supporting digital transformations in the TVET system and digital skills development. But doesn't mean that we are waiting for the next biennium period in order to start implementing that. We do work also on looking into the effects of digitalization on the TVET and skills development provision. There has been a report published on this subject together with UNESCO. We produce some resource guides as well on the same subject and policy briefs. and also on the effects of digitalization or skills demand and which digital skills will be needed. This is another report to come very soon. And then I just wanted to announce, because there were some questions in the chat, in the Q&A chat. The recording will be available, so please consult our webpage. I also would like to say that the report is available online. You can read that. It's only in English, but we have the key findings in 3 languages, English, French, and Spanish, which will be uploaded soon after we edit the translations. And finally, that the report also has an annex, and in annex, we have plenty of resources with links to the online materials, which may be very useful for the TVET providers. So I will welcome you to really look into that useful resource in the annex. So thank you very much again. And Sang-Hyun, thank you so much for the wonderful facilitation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Stay safe. Okay, please look after yourself. Okay, hopefully we'll see each other virtually soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.